Diane Zamora was a driven teenager with sky-high ambitions.
She wanted to be an astronaut.
She found her perfect wingman in 17-year-old David Graham.
His goal was to become a fighter pilot.
After they met, it was just sparks flying. She was cute, he was tall, handsome.
It became one of those manic, consuming teenage romances.
But their high-flying love affair would be thrown into a tailspin by a gruesome crime.
Cops see the dead body of a pretty teenage girl.
It was obvious that she had died a traumatic death.
The investigation would unveil a shocking story of betrayal and revenge, and leave everyone wondering how two driven and accomplished teenagers could wind up as cold-blooded killers.
This read like a Danielle Steele novel. It was so obsessive. He had a hole in his soul. She had a hole in hers.
He said, look what you made me do.
Texas, December 4th, 1995. It was just a little after 7:30 in the morning on a local ranch. The ranch owner was driving down his long driveway, but as he eased out onto the main road, he noticed something odd. There was a clump of long tangled hair in the barbed wire fence that lined his property. Curious, the ranch owner got out of his truck, but when he approached the fence, he was horrified to discover what was lying on the other side.
It was the dead body of a pretty teenage girl.
The rancher immediately headed back to the house to call 911. Within minutes, the rural roadside was swarming with police. A closer look at the body told officers there was no need to call paramedics.
We have a white female. She appears to be dead.
There was some blood. She was disheveled and clearly was a victim of foul play.
But little did the officers know that the unsettling sight of the young woman's body was just the beginning. In the coming months, their investigation would uncover a tale of betrayal, rage, and paint a disturbing picture of what two desperate and obsessed lovers would do to prove their love to one another.
This could not have occurred without the specific chemistry of this relationship.
Fort Worth, Texas, the metropolitan sidekick to Dallas. Fort Worth was also home to Diane Zamora. Born in 1978, Diane grew up the oldest of 4 siblings in a tightly knit family. But while the family was close, Diane's father had trouble keeping them afloat.
He struggled to keep a job.
They can't make ends meet most of the time.
The financial instability put a strain on the family. But where an unstable home life might have hampered some kids, Diane's only made her more determined. From a young age, she had lofty goals for herself.
At the age of 9, she walks into her family's dining room during dinner and says she wants to be an astronaut.
But unlike a lot of teenagers who dream of flying away in a spaceship, Diane was determined to do whatever she needed to do to make her dream a reality.
She was just like a bookworm. She was all about going to school and getting the highest achievements.
Diane kept her eye on the prize. She maintained straight A's and worked to build her resume. But her world was rocked by a family crisis when she was a teenager.
My dad started having his affairs, and then the whole house fell apart.
Diane's mother was devastated by the betrayal, and so was Diane.
That really shaped the way she thought of relationships.
That issue became very important to Diane. No one's going to cheat on me the way my mother was cheated on.
And for Diane, the best way to avoid being cheated on was to avoid the opposite sex altogether. She decided she'd rather be the girl boys asked for answers to the pop quiz rather than the girl they asked out on a date.
Diane definitely kept herself on the right path. She kept herself in the books. She didn't worry about all the parties that were going on.
With her parents battling their infidelity issues and her social life on ice, Diane made finishing high school near the top of her class her first priority. Then she planned to attend Naval Academy in Annapolis. And once she was a naval aviator, she'd apply for astronaut training. But the initial step in Diane's plan came when she joined the Civil Air Patrol, an ROTC-like program for young people interested in aviation and military careers.
She saw the Civil Air Patrol as something that would help her get ahead and get noticed in her applications.
Though the prospect of padding her resume wasn't the only thing Diane was attracted to, the Civil Air Patrol was where she ended up meeting 17-year-old David Graham, and where her resolve to avoid the opposite sex was put to the test.
She arrives, and there, standing in front of her, is this 6-foot-tall, athletic, articulate leader, David Graham.
A straight-A student and ROTC commander at nearby Mansfield High, David was also destined for the military. Although rather than Annapolis, David dreamed of attending the Air Force Academy.
David had very specific goals like Diane. His goal was to become a fighter pilot.
And just like Diane, David was also all business.
He was a very smart student. He was bookish. He studied hard.
He was athletic. He was on the cross-country team and in the ROTC program.
It was clear David was just as driven, disciplined, and focused on his future as Diane was on hers. But when the couple met in August of 1995, they both took notice of each other in a way that suddenly stirred in them some very new ambitions.
She's a very attractive girl, and he picked up on that right away.
She was cute. He was tall, 6'2", handsome.
There was so much chemistry between the couple that when David asked Diane out, Diane accepted, despite her commitment to avoid boys. The date went well, and by the end of the night, 17-year-old Diane found herself feeling something she wasn't used to.
She had never had this kind of romantic feeling in her life.
Over the next few weeks, the couple continued to see each other. In the heat of the Texas summer, the budding romance got intense in a hurry.
The relationship was very hot and heavy immediately. He was always encircling his arms around her. She was always holding on to one of his belt loops with a thumb.
But Diane did draw the line when it came to one thing.
Diane very much wanted to be a virgin until she got married.
Still reeling from the pain of her father's infidelity, Diane wanted her relationship with David to be different. But even though things were moving slowly in the bedroom, the couple did move quickly in one respect. Just 6 weeks after meeting, they made an announcement that shocked their families and friends.
They got engaged.
And while the decision to get married came quickly, the two 17-year-olds explained to their families that it hadn't come without a lot of careful thought.
They believed it to be their chosen purpose in life, not only to achieve their goals individually, but to achieve them collectively.
Their plan was to get married 5 years later after they'd both graduated.
But with the sexual tension between the young lovers mounting, waiting 5 years began to seem like an eternity when it came to Diane's desire to hold on to her virginity. So when David went from being her boyfriend to being her fiancé, Diane had a change of heart.
As a result of that commitment to get married, they consummated their relationship and had sex.
And as a result, the young lovers became even more engrossed in one another.
It was so obsessive and so physically connected. They were always touching one another, holding one another. They were inextricable.
There did end up being one thing that was able to separate the couple, even if only temporarily. With summer over and the new school year starting, Diane and David went back to finish their senior years, but they went to different schools. Diane attended Crowley High School, while David went to school 18 miles away at Mansfield High. Diane got through their time apart by focusing on her studies and daydreaming of the couple's future as a picture-perfect military power couple.
They saw themselves as the top guns of the 21st century. This young couple in love who also flew jets and saved America from the enemy.
It was a dream they both knew they'd have to wait 5 years to realize. But for Diane and David, the wait would turn out to be even longer. Because events more troubling than a mere separation were around the corner for this young couple. And instead of serving their country, the young lovers could end up serving time. Coming up, the investigation into the dead woman by the side of the road takes a surprising turn when police learn about a suspect with a frightening obsession.
He was clearly infatuated with her, so much so that he would just stare at her.
And a twist in the investigation leads police to believe they found their killer.
When the police then asked if he could take a lie detector test, his parents stepped in and said no, which began to make him a really serious suspect.
In December of 1995, Diane Zamora and David Graham were midway through their senior years of high school. The straight-A students had fallen in love after meeting in the Civil Air Patrol, and after a quick engagement, they each made plans to attend prestigious military academies before getting married and embarking together on ambitious careers.
She wanted to be an astronaut. He wanted to be an Air Force pilot.
Before any of that could happen, though, Diane and David would have to finish high school, which would be hard on the teen lovers since they attended different schools. But with graduation just a few months away, Diane and David were eagerly counting down the days until they could go back to spending all their time together and moving forward with their relationship. But on the morning of December 4th, around the same time that Diane and David were settling into their homerooms, a local rancher made a gruesome discovery on his property that would put the young couple's plans in jeopardy.
He comes out and sees this pretty blonde girl that's deceased.
Within minutes, the scene was crawling with cops. Based on the visible blood and trauma to the young woman's head, it didn't take officers long to determine the cause of death.
This person was killed by virtue of 2 gunshot wounds, one to the face and one to the head.
She was shot between the eyes. It looked like an execution.
But who had executed this woman? And who was she? A search of her body turned up no signs of identification. Based on her appearance, officers estimated her to be around 16 years old. A theory that seemed to be supported when they took a closer look at the girl's t-shirt.
The police noticed she's wearing a t-shirt for a high school track meet.
That was an indication of the fact that she was a local girl.
Less than an hour later, police had the dead girl's identity. 16-year-old Adrian Jones.
They had this 16-year-old girl who had been reported as missing.
Adrian was a junior at nearby Mansfield High School. Her mother had called police that morning when she got up and discovered her daughter wasn't in her bedroom.
They had discovered that she's not there, and so they call around. No one seems to know where she is.
Investigators sat down with Adrian's shaken parents and brother. According to them, Adrian was not the type of girl who got into trouble.
She was an all-American girl, well-liked, friendly.
She had nothing but a bright future ahead of her.
In fact, the worst thing Adrian had ever done was occasionally sneak out of her bedroom at night.
Adrian had snuck out of her window a couple of times.
And it was then that Adrian's brother spoke up. According to him, the night before his sister disappeared, he'd heard her sneaking out of the window again after everyone had gone to bed.
Her brother had heard her leave just after midnight.
Investigators knew that if Adrian had snuck out of her house the night before she died, it was most likely to meet someone. But who was she sneaking out with? And what did that person have to do with the crime?
They knew it wasn't a stranger bird. She probably knew her assailant.
Police knew there was no better place to find out who a teenage girl might have been sneaking out to meet than her high school. Detectives immediately headed to Mansfield High, where they began interviewing Adrian's classmates and friends.
In go these grown men into a high school full of teenage anxiety, teenage drama, teenage gossip. and lots of rumors already flying about Adrian.
Chief among those rumors was that Adrian had recently been the target of attention from a not-so-secret admirer. The problem was that Adrian hadn't appreciated the attention.
He was clearly infatuated with Adrian, so much so that he would show up at her sandwich shop where she worked and just stare at her, totally unnerved Adrian.
According to other students, the young man was a 17-year-old former classmate who had dropped out of Mansfield High earlier that year. And it was clear Adrian wasn't the only one who found him disturbing.
There were some reports that he had some psychological problems.
The revelation of Adrian's troubled admirer was certainly of interest to detectives, especially when they learned from one of Adrian's closest friends that the disturbed young man had actually called Adrian the night before she disappeared.
She was on the phone talking to her friend, and a call came through, and she put him on hold, and she came back. She said it was this boy that she didn't like.
Detectives couldn't help but wonder, had Adrian's stalker somehow managed to lure her from her bedroom the night before?
A theory. He became infatuated with Adrian just because she was pretty, beat her up over the head with something because she rejected him, and then shot her.
Investigators immediately tracked down Adrian's stalker and brought him in for questioning. And when questioned about his whereabouts on the night Adrian was killed, what he had to say only heightened their suspicions.
He said that he was intoxicated that night, that he had also taken some medication and couldn't remember what he did that night, which made him a serious suspect.
But the young man's lack of clear memory wasn't the only thing investigators found troubling.
When the police then asked if he could take a lie detector test, his parents stepped in and said, no, he's not taking the lie detector test. That made the police almost convinced they had the killer.
Investigators quickly secured a warrant for the young man's arrest. And a few days later, police made their move.
The cops bust through the door of his home, drag him to jail, charge him with murder.
But just as investigators became convinced they were on the cusp of closing this case, new evidence would soon emerge that would turn everything they thought they knew about the murder of Adrian Jones upside down. Coming up, detectives begin to wonder if they have the right man in custody.
There was nothing to suggest that he was the killer. No hair, no blood, no fibers, nothing.
And the investigation takes a shocking turn when police receive a bizarre tip from an unexpected source.
The Grand Prairie Police got a call out of the blue from the Naval Academy.
And it's a Navy officer who says, do you have a murder case involving a teenager that is unsolved?
As teenagers, Diane Zamora and David Graham were inseparable, the seemingly perfect couple that did everything together.
Their relationship grew pretty quickly and dramatically, and it became one of those manic, consuming teenage romances.
In fact, the only thing that seemed like it could separate the young couple was their individual ambitions. Both were standout students with plans to attend prestigious military academies. Diane had just received an appointment to Naval Academy in Annapolis, while David had just learned he'd gotten into the Air Force Academy and was headed to Colorado Springs. But even though they'd be attending schools in different states, both Diane and David were confident that neither the distance nor time apart could shake the love they had for one another.
They created this plan where they were going to get married, but they were going to wait 5 years till everything was sewn up and it was, appropriate.
But while David and Diane moved closer to achieving their dreams, police in Diane's hometown of Grand Prairie, Texas, were moving closer to charging a suspect in a murder case. On the morning of December 4th, 1995, 16-year-old Mansfield High School junior Adrian Jones had been found murdered by the side of the road in rural Tarrant County. 11 days later, police had arrested a 17-year-old Mansfield High School dropout who was suspected of stalking the beautiful blonde teenager.
He was supposedly completely infatuated with her, so much so that he was a little bit scary about it.
When questioned, the young man told police he had been drinking the night Adrian was killed and had no memory or alibi for where he had been or what he had been doing. And when detectives asked the young man to take a lie detector test, his parents refused.
To the cops, it was another sign that this could be a really serious suspect.
They were fully confident that this was their guy.
But in order to make murder charges stick, investigators needed more than confidence. They needed evidence. CSIs performed a thorough search of both the young man's bedroom and his pickup truck. But lab results were unable to find anything that could tie back to Adrian Jones.
There was nothing in that pickup truck. No hair, no blood, no fibers, nothing to suggest that he was the killer.
Which put even more pressure on authorities to either produce some sort of evidence against the young man or release him. Before that happened, the DA's office began pushing again for a lie detector test. This time, the suspect and his parents agreed.
The DA's office convinced the young man's parents to lie and take a polygraph.
But when the results from the test came back, they weren't what investigators expected.
He passes his polygraph with flying colors.
Based upon the lack of any viable direct evidence and the past polygraph, the DA's office refused to take the case.
The young man was released from jail, and investigators were left wondering where to take their case next.
They had no additional leads to pursue, and without any leads coming in, they didn't have anything additionally to investigate.
By August of 1996, 9 months had passed with no new leads. That same month, Adrian's class began their senior year at Mansfield High, while standout sweethearts David Graham and Diane Zamora began their much-publicized appointments to the Air Force and Naval Academies. But on August 29th, police investigating the murder of Adrian Jones received a surprise phone call from an unexpected place.
The Grand Prairie Police got a call out of the blue from the Naval Academy.
It's a Navy officer who says, "Do you have a murder case involving a teenager that is unsolved?"
This was Adrian Jones.
The naval officer told police he was calling because of a disturbing conversation he had just had with a pair of his cadets.
This officer says, "We had 2 young female cadets come to us.
The young women were upset because one of their roommates and fellow midshipmen had made a disturbing claim about her high school boyfriend and something he had done for her back in their hometown.
This cadet at the Naval Academy had told other fellow cadets that her boyfriend loved her so much that he had killed for her.
Needless to say, investigators were eager to learn who the young woman was making these claims. According to the naval officer, she was a freshman cadet, a native of Grand Prairie, Texas, 18-year-old Diane Zamora.
When the police got this name, Diane Zamora, they had no idea, literally who she was. So that was a huge surprise for them.
Diane Zamora was nowhere on law enforcement's radar.
But she was now. Detectives from Grand Prairie wasted no time in hopping on the next plane to Annapolis to talk with Diane Zamora in person. But by the time they got there, Diane was already casting her late-night confession to her roommates in a very different light.
When they interviewed her, she claimed that she had fabricated all this and made it up.
Diane acknowledged that the murder of Adrian Jones had been big news back in Grand Prairie, and she thought telling her academy roommates that her boyfriend had committed the murder might be fun.
Her explanation is that, yes, she'd said it, but she was just goofing around, telling tales, late at night in a dorm room.
But even though Diane claimed she'd made up the story about the murder, she hadn't made up the fact that she had a boyfriend.
She said that she did have a boyfriend who was at the Air Force Academy, and his name was David Graham.
Diane insisted that the real truth was that neither she nor David had anything to do with the murder of Adrian Jones. And with no evidence to the contrary, detectives decided to head back to Texas. they learned Diane would be following right behind them. Because the Naval Academy took murder confessions, even supposedly false ones, very seriously.
The Navy officials decided to suspend her, so they gave her a plane ticket to fly back to Dallas.
But not long after detectives arrived back in Texas, they discovered that Diane hadn't.
She changed planes and flew to Colorado Springs.
Colorado Springs, home to the Air Force Academy, and to Diane's boyfriend, David Graham. Suspicious as to why Diane was so anxious to see her boyfriend, detectives once again hit the road. This time, they headed to Colorado Springs, where they expected to find David and Diane together, and where they hoped that David might shed some light on his girlfriend's odd story.
It's time to go interrogate this man. Find out if what Diane's telling these cadets in Annapolis is true.
When detectives arrived at the Air Force Academy, they found that Diane had already left and headed back home to Texas, but David was still there. And when investigators sat down with him, they observed a young man who came across more like a general than a murder suspect.
He had a ramrod straight back. He had perfect posture. He was yes sir, no ma'am. He was very direct, very forceful.
David told police that Diane had made her visit brief because she was upset about being kicked out of school. As far as why she made the bizarre confession to her roommates in the first place, David told police he was as confused as they were.
He says he cannot understand why his girlfriend would tell such a ridiculous story. Maybe she's going through mental troubles.
But between Diane's confession and her secretive trip to Colorado, detectives believed David knew more than he was letting on. And they brought in someone who they hoped would be able to convince David to share what he knew. His commanding officer.
So then one of his Air Force officers, his commander, looks at him and says, "David, you have a duty as an Air Force cadet to tell the truth."
The move paid off.
His attitude and demeanor changed.
In all of those years of trying to be the great Air Force cadet, to do the right thing, came flooding back.
David just all of a sudden decided that he was going to tell the truth.
But little did detectives know that the story David Graham was about to tell would leave everyone who knew the promising young man and his fiancée not only stunned, but horrified beyond belief. Coming up, David finally comes clean and unveils a shocking confession unlike anything police have ever read.
This read like a Danielle Steele novel. It was so obsessive. Then this one betrayal.
17-year-old sweethearts Diane Zamora and David Graham had both achieved their dreams of being appointed to two of the top military colleges in the United States.
She was a cadet at the Naval Academy. David Graham was a cadet at the Air Force Academy.
But even as they set off in different directions to pursue their education, their dedication to one another hadn't waned.
They really believed they had the perfect teenage love affair, that they were the two chosen kids.
But by early September of 1996, they had also become the prime suspects in the murder of 16-year-old Adrian Jones, thanks in large part to a late-night confession made by Diane to her roommates at the Naval Academy.
She had claimed her boyfriend who lived in Mansfield had killed somebody because he loved her so much.
And while Diane changed her story when interviewed on September 6th, when police talked to David at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, he told detectives he was ready to reveal the truth. But David told them he didn't want to tell them what happened. Instead, he wanted to write it down.
I worked a number of murder cases and never had a defendant offer to type their own statement. David decided to put his own words on paper.
Detectives left David to type, and an hour and a half later, they were handed a 4-page typed confession that began, surprisingly, with David's take on his love affair with Diane.
This read like a Danielle Steele novel, full of the romance that he had gone through with Diane, full of the joy they felt.
But as detectives read on, they saw that the joy the couple felt for one another had been harshly interrupted.
Then this one betrayal.
According to the confession, Adrian had been one of David's classmates at Mansfield High. Both had been on the varsity track and cross-country teams. And one night, about a month before the murder, Adrian had asked David to give her a ride home from a track meet in Lubbock.
She asked him to drive her home. They stopped behind an elementary school.
They had engaged in a one-time sexual tryst.
A tryst that weighed heavily on David's conscience. So a few weeks later, David decided to come clean.
For a month, he was tormented and finally had to confess to Diane.
It threw Diane into this crazy rage. She's throwing things around the room, throwing things at David.
Unimaginable sobbing, distraught, hitting her head on the floor.
David wrote that once Diane calmed down, she didn't break up with him. Instead, she told him that if he wanted to stay together, there was only one way to make that happen.
Diane insisted that the only way he could make it right was for him to kill her.
Adrian had to die.
In a desperate move to preserve his relationship with Diane and their future together, David wrote that he agreed to go along with Diane's request. For the next 2 days, David and Diane formulated a plan.
They were going to lure Adrian out late at night. Diane was going to hide in the trunk of their car. And David was going to drive Adrian out to a secluded spot.
David was going to break her neck, and they were going to weight her down with weights and put her body in a jump lake.
David wrote that on the night of December 4th, he picked Adrian up outside her home just after midnight and drove to the rural roadside where he parked his car. He then leaned in like he was going to kiss Adrian. But instead, he wrapped his hands around her neck and tried to strangle Adrian to death. But it was harder than he thought it would be.
David said it wasn't like it was on TV. You couldn't just snap their neck. And the victim began fighting back.
Around that same time, Diane rose up from her hiding spot in the back seat of the car. And when she saw Adrian trying to fight David off, she stepped in to help David finish the job.
Diane picked up a weight from the back seat and smashed the young lady in the back of the head.
At that point, David wrote that a gravely injured Adrian made a desperate attempt to escape.
The window was down on the passenger side of the car. As she climbed out of the window, stumbled across the barbed wire fence, just instinctively trying to get away from her assailant now.
Adrian's foot tangled in the barbed wire. She fell and was unable to get up. It was then, David wrote, that Diane directed him on what to do next.
Diane told him, finish it. David took the pistol that he had taken with him and went across the fence and shot her in the face and head.
After reading his confession, detectives immediately placed David under arrest. They also contacted their colleagues in Fort Worth, where Diane was placed under arrest. And once she was in custody, detectives were quick to let Diane know that David had come clean.
They told her about David's confession, and she very quietly, after a few seconds, gave her own confession.
Diane told investigators that when David confessed to sleeping with Adrian, the pain of her father's infidelities came rushing back.
It was a pain that never went away, and Diane was not going to let that happen to her.
And so Diane admitted she told David that Adrian Jones had to die.
Diane admitted that it was her idea to kill Adrian.
In fact, Diane's version of what happened on the night of December 4th was exactly the same as David's.
David and Diane's statements were almost mirror images. There were no differences.
And so when it came time for prosecutors to lay down charges against the couple, there were no differences there either.
That's capital murder, which in Texas is punishable by either life in prison or death by lethal injection.
In February of 1998, 20-year-old Diane Zamora entered a Fort Worth courtroom to face the charge of capital murder. And the prosecutor made it quite clear that it was Diane who was on trial.
They were painting her as the mastermind in this.
Diane, according to the prosecution, had killed for love. And aside from her own confession, the state offered up further proof that Diane planned the murder. Her own date book from December 1995.
It was very telling because there was a date circled.
December 4th, to be exact.
That was the date that Adrian was killed.
This was, yes, a crime of passion. It took place. It was planned.
But when it came time for Diane's defense, they argued that Diane was the opposite of a mastermind.
That she was an unwitting accomplice.
An accomplice David Graham knew exactly how to manipulate.
He used his money, he used his time, and he developed a possessive, controlling bond with her.
But on February 9th, Diane took the stand in her own defense. She explained to the jury that while she had been there when Adrian was killed, she had also left an important detail out of her confession.
She said, what I didn't say in the confession was that David was making me do this.
He said, look what you made me do.
And according to Diane's defense team, the prosecution couldn't prove otherwise. At least not beyond a reasonable doubt.
The prosecution had circumstantial evidence. Nobody saw the crime. Nobody saw them do anything.
Was Diane Zamora the mastermind behind the brutal death of 16-year-old Adrian Jones? Or, as her attorneys claimed, was she forced to help her lover commit a ruthless murder? The answer to those questions would be up to a jury to decide. Coming up, Diane Zamora learns her fate, and David Graham faces his own day in court, where shocking new evidence is unveiled that threatens to change everything people thought they knew about this case.
There was no physical relationship between David and Adrian Jones. David fabricated the affair to bring jealousy out of Diane.
For a while, it appeared like engaged teenagers Diane Zamora and David Graham had the world by the tail.
Diane Zamora at one time had everything. David Graham was an honors graduate, exceptional athlete.
But by February of 1998, their futures had gone from bright to bleak. As they sat in jail on charges of brutally murdering 16-year-old Adrian Jones in December of 1995. And following her trial on February 17th, Diane waited in a Fort Worth courtroom to hear the jury's verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant Diane Michelle Zamora guilty of the offense of capital murder as alleged in the indictment.
The guilty verdict meant that Diane now faced the death penalty for her role in Adrian's murder. But key testimony from a particular witness at Diane's sentencing hearing caught the entire courtroom by surprise.
Adrian's mother encouraged that the prosecutors not pursue the death penalty.
With Adrian's own mother asking for leniency, the presiding judge handed Diane a life sentence.
The state of Texas having waived the death penalty, your punishment is hereby set at life in prison.
6 months later, it came time for 20-year-old David Graham to face his day in court. Just like at Diane's trial, David's attorneys opened their case by discrediting their client's own confession.
The confession was a false confession.
But why would David willingly confess to a crime he didn't commit? According to the defense, it was a chivalrous effort to protect both the woman he loved and Adrian Jones's true killer, Diane Zamora.
Diane Zamora did kill Adrian Jones. David Graham did not. David Graham was not there.
According to the defense, David had only learned of the murder after Diane confessed to the crime. It was a surprising twist no one in the courtroom had expected.
Why would you go through all this trouble and say all this, and then all of a sudden change it at the very end? It makes no sense to me.
Even more shocking was the fact that on rebuttal, the prosecution conceded that David hadn't been telling the truth, but not about his confession. Instead, prosecutors presented evidence that strongly suggested that David had completely fabricated his affair with Adrian Jones, the incident that initially sparked Diane's jealousy and served as the entire motive for the crime.
David said after they got back from a track meet, she asked him to drive her home. They stopped behind an elementary school, had a very brief sexual tryst, and then he drove her home.
Evidence came forward that there was a girl who was at the school who took Adrian home from that Lubbock track meet. David did not.
No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You drove Adrian Jones home from the Mansfield High School parking lot following the Lubbock track meet.
Yes, sir.
David Graham could not and did not drive her home that night.
No.
There was no intercourse. There was no physical relationship between David and Adrian Jones.
David fabricated the affair to bring jealousy out of Diane.
No one could say for certain why David had wanted to make Diane jealous. The only thing that was certain was that the revelation painted David Graham even more disturbed and cold-blooded. But what effect would it have on the jury? On July 24th, they announced they had reached a verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant David Christopher Graham guilty of the offense of capital murder as alleged in the indictment.
Once again, the Jones family asked the judge for leniency, and David avoided the death penalty by being sentenced to life in prison. In the years since the verdict, David has come to accept responsibility for the crime, and once again admits he killed Adrian Jones at Diane's request. But Diane still insists that it was David who was solely responsible for the planning and carrying out of Adrian's murder, and that the only thing she's guilty of is helping cover up a crime for the man she once considered the love of her life, which she tried to explain in this 2007 interview from prison with NBC's Dateline.
At the time, I was thinking with my heart, not my head. More than anything, that I wanted to protect him. Even now, I can't wish him hurt, because a part of me will always love him.
But regardless of who initially conceived the murder and why, the one thing that is clear is the damage that David and Diane caused in their brief time together.
This was a crime that really could not have occurred without the specific chemistry of this relationship.
He had a hole in his soul. She had a hole in hers.
Was a rebellious and spoiled brat with an insatiable appetite for the finer things in life.
Christina always had to have nice cars, the nice shoes, the nice clothes and everything.
32-year-old Jason Singleton was a successful older man with means and money to give Christina everything she wanted.
Jason made a pretty good living. He would show up with new clothes or new shoes or some jewelry.
Theirs was a deeply passionate relationship. But their infatuation for each other also had a dark side.
Hers and Jason's relationship was dangerously passionate.
Volatile is the perfect word to describe it.
With the two of them, it was fire and gasoline.
But a brutal crime would expose a scandalous web of lust, obsession, and betrayal.
I just couldn't believe it. I was in total shock.
And ultimately shine a spotlight on the dark and sinister depths to this couple's unhinged romance.
A love triangle, an act of horrific violence.
a missing person, a standoff between police. It just had every ingredient that would stir the public's interest.
January 19th, 2011, Richmond, Kentucky. On a farm just outside of town, a farmer was transporting hay bales. He was just finishing up his work for the day when he spotted several black garbage bags discarded in the middle of his field.
He starts tearing through the bags, trying to open them up. As he went down further, he felt something bristly, and he thought it might have been hair from like a cut-up deer or something.
But the farmer soon realized to his horror that what he'd found wasn't deer meat, but a severed human head.
It was just the cruelest, most shocking thing that he had ever seen.
Law enforcement arrived on the scene moments later. They found 6 bags in all, each containing pieces of what appeared to be the dismembered body parts of a young woman.
In one bag, you have a head and a neck. In another bag, you have the lower torso.
The officers are aghast. Whose body parts had they found? And how had they wound up in garbage bags on this quiet farm? The search for answers would lead police down a dark and twisted path, and along the way, expose a sordid story of obsession, desire, and betrayal, unlike anything the people of Richmond, Kentucky had ever seen. Located just south of Lexington, Richmond, Kentucky is the sort of quaint and friendly small town where most everyone knows each other by their first name.
It's a nice place to live, a nice place to raise a family.
Richmond was also home to Christina Markham. Born in 1983, Christina's parents divorced when she was young. But even though she grew up in a broken home, young Christina never wanted for anything, and as a child was used to getting whatever her heart desired.
She was always a little pretentious and I guess what you could say, spoiled. She got her way no matter how she had to do it.
But Christina wasn't just spoiled. She was also defiant and unruly. She seemed to relish playing her parents against each other and acting out both at home and school at every opportunity she had.
Some people actually seem to thrive off of rebellion, and Christina appeared to be one of those types of people. She really got a thrill out of attention, even negative attention.
Christina always kind of had a clash with authority, I guess you could say.
After graduating high school, Christina's rebellious attitude seemed to wane a little. But her taste and desire for the finer things in life never wavered.
Christina always had to have nice cars, the nice shoes, the nice bags, the nice clothes and everything. And, you know, that might be kind of typical for someone in a big city. It's not really that typical around here.
Her exacting tastes extended to men as well. And Christina dated a string of attractive and charismatic boyfriends. But none of the relationships seemed to work, because Christina wasn't satisfied with just good looks. She wanted a boyfriend who was devastatingly handsome and rich enough to pamper her with every material need her heart desired.
Christina liked more of the finer things in life.
And in 2008, when she was 25, she met an up-and-coming computer company executive who not only had the money to measure up to her lofty expectations, but had her swooning from the moment she first laid eyes on him. 32-year-old Jason Singleton. Born in 1976, Jason Singleton was also a native of Richmond, Kentucky.
Jason comes from a good family. His dad played football at UK. His mom was working in the medical profession.
After graduating from high school, Jason enlisted in the Army, where he became a computer specialist, which eventually led to a lucrative career with a Lexington-based computer company.
He was the manager at the affiliated computer service. Working with Jason was great. He was probably one of the best bosses I've ever had.
But Jason had never been lucky in love. At the age of 32, he was 7 years older than Christina and had already been married and divorced twice.
Jason had 2 marriages, and I just don't think was comfortable that he, met the right person.
But all of that changed when Jason met Christina. From the moment he first laid eyes on the 25-year-old brunette, Jason was nothing less than spellbound.
Sparks flew when he met Christina. She broke the mold for him.
She was a new chapter in his life. The way he described it, like she was the perfect woman.
Christina felt the same way about Jason. He was everything she was looking for in a man. Tall, strong, handsome, and rich. By that time, Jason was earning a 6-figure salary, and he loved spending it on Christina. The couple was obsessed with one another, and even though Christina was younger and less mature than Jason, he couldn't wait to take their relationship to the next level.
He proposed to her, within 2 weeks. He had bought her this really ridiculous emerald-cut diamond ring that was clear as a bell. It was upwards of $15,000 to $20,000.
In addition to the lavish engagement ring, Jason also bought a nice house in Richmond for them to live in. To their friends and neighbors, the couple's fixation with each other seemed to have no bounds. But the intensity of their relationship had a darker side as well, giving way to jealousy and anger.
Hers and Jason's relationship was pretty explosive at times, and it could be dangerously passionate.
Emotions ran high between the couple, especially when they'd been drinking. And at a 4th of July party hosted by some friends, Christina's temper boiled over when she spotted Jason talking to another woman.
We heard them fussing and arguing, and it became physical. She actually jumped on Jason's back. She was always very jealous of Jason when they were together.
With the two of them, it was just fire and gasoline.
Their frequent fights turned violent, and one night, after a particularly bad blow-up, police were called to intervene. It turned out Christina had thrown a cell phone at Jason and split his scalp open.
They were always pushing each other's buttons, and he did something to provoke her, and she just wham, hit him in the back of the head as far as I know.
An emergency protective order was sought by Jason. Christina was not shy to show her emotions at all, and there was some very bizarre behavior.
Jason was taken to the hospital to get stitches, while Christina spent the night in jail. The couple realized things had finally gone too far and decided to call off their engagement. Devastated by the breakup, Christina sought comfort in the arms of her old high school boyfriend, while Jason rebounded by dating a 25-year-old single mother named Angela Frazier.
After the breakup, Jason kind of pulled back away from everyone. The next thing I hear is that he had been introduced to someone else through a mutual friend.
Like Jason, Angela was divorced, and she was raising 2 small children on her own. The two hit it off immediately, and just like he had with Christina, Jason didn't waste any time making things official with Angela.
3 days after they had met, Angela said, "You're not going to believe this. Jason and I just got married."
I was pretty happy that he had Christina out of his life, because I thought maybe this new girl would help him to get back on track.
After the wedding ceremony, Angela moved into the house Jason had once shared with Christina. But they weren't the only ones to put Jason and Christina's messy relationship in the rearview mirror by quickly getting remarried. Not long after Jason tied the knot with Angela, Christina married her old high school boyfriend.
Everybody has rebound relationships. They had rebound marriages.
But it wasn't very long after Christina had said "I do" to her new husband, then she began to realize she still had deep feelings for Jason. And it turned out he wasn't doing a very good job of getting over her either. A friend told Christina that Jason had been battling depression ever since they'd split up, and had even started abusing drugs to cope with his misery.
Christina was contacted by a mutual friend and said, Jason is strung out on methamphetamine, and he will listen to you. Go talk to her.
When Christina went to Jason's house, he told her he appreciated her concern. And while he confessed he had a hard time dealing with their breakup, seeing her helped ease the pain. The former couple made a commitment to reconnect, albeit now as just friends. Even though in their hearts, they both secretly still yearned for one another.
Very volatile, violent relationships, and they can't break that tie. There's some kind of bond there.
The question now was, would the couple be able to resist their urges? Or would their lust for one another reignite their fiery romance in a manner that would have drastic and deadly consequences? Coming up, people find out just how far Jason and Christina are willing to go for a second chance at happiness.
And I could tell that there was a lot of anxiety and emotions that were about to explode.
When Christina Markham and Jason Singleton met in Richmond, Kentucky in 2008, each of them thought they'd found true love. Both were passionate and impulsive people, and their romance was nothing short of explosive.
The things they would do to each other just was over the top.
But by 2010, their tumultuous relationship had turned violent. The couple decided to call off their engagement and go their separate ways. Christina rebounded with her high school sweetheart, while Jason married a local woman named Angela Frazier. Despite their attempts to move on, Christina and Jason couldn't shake their yearning for one another. But as the ex-lovers wrestled with their desires, something unexpected happened that would change both their relationship and lives in ways no one could have imagined. It all started on Monday, January 17th, 2011, when the mother of 25-year-old Angela Singleton realized her daughter had been missing for more than 24 hours.
Her mom calls me Monday, and she's like, have you talked to Angela? And I said, no, not since Saturday. She said, well, she's missing.
Angela's family called the police and told officers the last time they'd heard from Angela was 2 nights earlier, when she and her husband, Jason Singleton, had gotten into a fight. Jason had kicked Angela out of the house, so she'd gone to stay with a friend over the weekend.
She still loved him with all of her heart. She was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have nowhere to go.
According to Angela's mother, her daughter had gone back to the house on Sunday to pick up her things, but no one had seen or spoken to her since then, and she wasn't returning any calls. To police, a person missing for less than 48 hours wasn't necessarily a cause for concern, but Angela had left her 2 small children with her mother, and friends and family insisted that it wasn't like Angela to abandon them.
She's never done this. She has never not talked to us for hours. It's definitely not like her.
And the more detectives learned about the days leading up to Angela's disappearance, the more they too became concerned. Angela's family told police they hadn't exactly approved of her marriage to Jason Singleton. Angela had only been dating Jason for a few days when he unexpectedly proposed. But Angela seemed happy, so her family held their tongue.
We thought it was way too fast. We thought she didn't know him well enough, he didn't know her well enough, but they seemed happy, so we just went with it.
But it seemed Angela and Jason's honeymoon had ended almost as soon as it began. Less than 3 weeks after Angela moved into Jason's house, his ex-fiancée, Christina Markham, had re-entered his life. And even though Christina had supposedly married someone else, she seemed jealous of Angela and determined to win Jason back.
She could not stand it that he had moved another female into the house that they shared.
Friends and family told police that Christina had started harassing Angela.
Angela called me several times saying that Christina had drove by, called her phone, texted her phone, made threats.
They had to call the cops on her several times.
But according to Angela's family, things had only gotten worse. They told investigators that there had been several disturbance calls at the residence, starting on January 11th, just 5 days before Angela's disappearance.
Christina had thrown a rock through their window.
Angela wouldn't leave, and Christina wouldn't accept the fact that Angela was there, and it just seemed to escalate from there.
A neighbor even told police that one night Christina had gone as far as to urinate on the home's porch, as though she were marking her territory.
She had called me one night and said that she was hiding in the bushes, and I was like, stay away from there. What are you doing? You are married to another man. Leave Jason alone.
It all came to a head on Friday, January 14th. At 2:30 in the morning, local patrol officers had responded to a 911 call from Angela Singleton, claiming that Christina Markham damaged her car. The two women had gotten into a fight, and Angela expected Jason to take her side, but instead, he shocked her by confessing that he was still in love with Christina.
He told her that he was going out, and whenever he got back, she was to be gone.
She knew at that point that it was over. You know, that she needed to get her things and get out of the house.
But when Angela came back on Sunday the 16th to retrieve her belongings, she discovered that Jason had changed the locks and called 911. This time, the responding officers decided to put an end to the conflict, informing Jason that Angela was legally entitled to enter the house.
When the officers came, they said it was, a marital property and she could spend the night there and get her things.
Angela's phone records showed that she made several calls from the house to friends and family that Sunday, as she packed up her children's belongings and decided what she was going to do next.
She had really nowhere to go. So that's what she talked to me about that day. It was just finding an apartment.
Angela's last phone call was to her cousin at 9 a.m. It was the last time anyone would hear from her again.
I called her all day Sunday until her phone went into voicemail. In the back of my mind, I kept thinking, she just doesn't want to talk to anyone right now. That's what I kept hoping. But we knew by the next morning something was wrong.
Christina Markham's harassment of Angela was enough to make detectives consider her a person of interest. But they couldn't help but wonder. Since Jason had kicked his new wife to the curb, it appeared that Christina had already won. With her rival out of the picture, what motive did she have for harming Angela? In detectives' eyes, Jason Singleton didn't appear to have much of a motive either. He'd already made his intentions clear, and he also had an alibi. When detectives spoke with Jason, he told them he'd gone to stay with his parents while Angela cleared out her belongings. He hadn't planned on returning until the next day. Richmond police put out a bulletin on Angela's car, hoping it might be spotted by Highway Patrol. They didn't have to wait very long. Just a few hours later, a trooper found the car abandoned on the side of the road off Interstate 75. It was on fire.
A police officer actually saw a person walking away from the vehicle. But by the time he got to the car, the person was gone.
The fire had been contained to the car's engine compartment, which left detectives wondering if the figure seen leaving the scene was in fact Angela abandoning her broken-down vehicle. Was it possible she tried to head home on foot, or possibly even tried to hitch a ride with the wrong person?
Somebody picked them up, nobody just walks that far without being seen again.
Anything was possible, but the burnt remains of the car provided no additional clues to Angela's whereabouts. Detectives were beginning to lose hope of ever finding Angela Singleton. Little did detectives know the missing mother of two was about to turn back up, and in the most shocking and gruesome way possible. Coming up, detectives uncover a troubling clue about the night Angela disappeared.
When you add drugs to a situation like this, it can open an entire Pandora's box.
And a hostage crisis leads to the apprehension of a potential killer.
People are wondering, what is this man about to do? Is he actually about to shoot someone?
Markham and Jason Singleton were a pair of passionate and obsessed ex-lovers, desperate to give their on-again, off-again relationship another chance. The only problem was, they were each now married to other people.
They broke up and married people really quickly, but obviously they weren't over each other.
Jason's wife, Angela Singleton, hadn't been just blindsided by Jason's decision to go back to Christina. She'd also been left homeless by the decision.
In order to prove his love for Christina, Jason actually kicked Angela out of the house that they shared.
But no sooner had Angela been kicked out of Jason's house than she suddenly disappeared. Police quickly suspected foul play, and Angela's recent dust-up with both Jason and Christina had made the couple persons of interest. Of particular interest to the police were a series of threats and domestic disturbances Christina had committed against Angela before Jason kicked her to the curb.
Christina was showing up at their house, throwing a rock through his window. I even heard she urinated on his front step.
But while Christina's threats and bizarre behavior certainly drew suspicion, the fact that she'd already won the battle for Jason's affections seemed to eliminate any motive she might have had to get rid of Angela. And Jason seemed to have an alibi as well. He'd been staying with his parents while Angela cleared her things out of the house, which had been the last time anyone had seen her.
Her mother reported her missing, and within a day or two, the police had found her empty car on the side of the interstate.
After 2 days, the trail had seemingly run cold, and detectives didn't know where else to turn. Then, on Wednesday, January 19th, everyone's worst fears were confirmed. It started when a farmer in nearby Valley View, Kentucky was bringing in hay from a field and spotted several trash bags spread across his property. When he looked inside the bags, he made a gruesome discovery.
He starts tearing through the bags, trying to open them up. He felt something bristly, and he thought it might have been hair from like a cut-up deer or something.
He quickly realized that he had stumbled upon the remains of a murder victim.
Officers found 6 bags in all, each containing pieces of what appeared to be the dismembered body parts of a young woman in her 20s.
In one bag you have a head and a neck. In one bag you have the arms and the hands. In another bag you have the lower torso.
Whose dismembered body parts had police found inside these bags? The remains had been so badly disfigured that it was difficult to determine her identity. But there were several tattoos that soon helped investigators confirm what many suspected. The remains belonged to 25-year-old Angela Singleton.
That evening, they called me and asked me to come down to the police station. And then they told me that they had identified her.
An autopsy quickly determined that while Angela's body had been dismembered, that hadn't been the cause of death. The medical examiner found signs of significant bruising around Angela's neck, which suggested she'd been strangled to death. Lab tests also revealed Angela had a toxic level of barbiturates in her bloodstream.
The autopsy report shows that Miss Fraser had ingested a large quantity of drugs, specifically Valium, and was in a semi-unconscious state at the time she was killed.
To detectives, it was a surprising and ominous discovery. If Angela had been battling a drug problem, the list of potential suspects in her murder would grow substantially.
When you add drugs to a situation like this, it really muddies the waters, and it can open an entire Pandora's box of motives and other unsavory characters that investigators have to look into.
Angela's family was devastated by the news, but also shocked. They insisted that Angela didn't have a drug problem, and that she'd only taken sedatives she'd been prescribed by her doctor to help her deal with the stress of taking care of 2 small children.
She had a prescription of Valium that she was on.
In fact, Angela's family told detectives that if anyone in her life had a drug problem, it was Jason Singleton.
Jason was suffering from chemical dependent substance abuse. He was actively using methamphetamine, Oxycontin, among other drugs.
Angela's family said Jason wasn't exactly the mild-mannered computer company executive he appeared to be. He had a violent temper, a temper that had only gotten worse when Christina Markham came back into his life.
He would be the nicest guy and stuff, but with Christina around, it's like she brought that out in people.
Based on the information from Angela's family, investigators decided it was time to take another look at both Jason Singleton and Christina Markham. But before they had a chance to track the couple down, the case took a shocking turn. It started the next day, on Thursday, January 20th, when a security guard at a local mall saw a man shoplift a pair of pants from a store. It was Jason Singleton.
He actually saw Jason try to take a pair of pants from the store and walk away.
The guard approached Jason and asked to see a receipt for the pants. But Jason became hostile when confronted, and suddenly drew a weapon.
Once Jason actually produces a gun, this transitions from just a simple shoplifting incident to an armed standoff.
Instead of pulling the trigger, Jason took off running through the mall. The guard immediately gave chase and called for backup. As he ran past them, shoppers could hear Jason yell into his cell phone.
As he's attempting to flee, Jason apparently makes a phone call, and he's overheard saying to the person on the other line, "Just remember, whatever happens, I love you."
Jason was able to temporarily lose the security guards in the main mall. He then made his way to a nearby trucking office, where he took the employees inside hostage.
Within a matter of moments, this incident escalates from a shoplifting episode to an armed hostage crisis. And you have to wonder what is going on with this man.
Police immediately responded to the scene and surrounded the building, but Jason refused to come out or release any of his hostages. As they waited to see what Jason would do next, investigators couldn't help but wonder what, if anything, his bizarre behavior had to do with his estranged wife's murder.
They found her body, and then he runs into a building and holds people hostage. I mean, that's a red flag right there.
But before detectives could figure out what Jason had to do with Angela's death, they had to bring an end to his standoff with police. The question now was whether Jason would eventually surrender and free his hostages, or was he determined to go out in a blaze of glory? Coming up, Jason's standoff with police reaches its shocking conclusion.
I didn't know that he was capable of doing something that malicious.
And new clues come to light that make detectives question everything they thought they knew about the murder of Angela Singleton.
Some carpet had been torn up, part of the subfloor had been cut away. They tried to destroy evidence by burning it.
When beautiful Christina Markham met successful businessman Jason Singleton, she thought she'd found the man who could give her everything her heart desired. Their relationship, however, wasn't meant to last. After 2 years of constant fighting, the couple had split up. But neither Christina nor Jason had been able to let the other go. And while each had tried to move on by marrying other people, their intense passion had driven them back into each other's arms and into an adulterous affair.
The relationship they had was very volatile, very passionate. It's almost drug-like that they couldn't get enough of each other.
But the sudden and grisly death of Jason's new wife, Angela Singleton, had led to an investigation that cast a sinister spotlight on Jason and Christina's affair. But before detectives could confront Jason with their suspicions, he'd appeared to snap and taken hostages in an armed standoff with police at a local shopping mall.
He runs into a building and holds people hostage.
At this point, everyone is wondering, what is he going to do?
Finally, after a tense 20-minute standoff, Jason agreed to release his hostages and come out. But when he stepped out of the building, he was still brandishing his gun. So officers responded with force.
The police shoot him with, non-lethal force and take him into custody.
But while Jason's wounds were not life-threatening, he'd surprised officers by telling them he'd wished they'd killed him instead.
In his mind, that was the best way out of this mess, was just have them shoot him, he'd be done with it.
He says, I've done the worst thing you can imagine.
But what exactly had Jason done? When officers took him back to the station, he refused to tell them. But they noticed that his clothes were covered in a black substance that resembled soot from a fire. While Jason sat silently at the police station, investigators obtained warrants to search his home. As soon as they entered the residence, they found signs that someone had tried to burn something large in the fireplace.
What the police saw when they went in there to secure the scene was that some carpet had been torn up, part of the subfloor had been cut away.
To police, it looked like Jason had cut up his carpet in an attempt to burn it, most likely in an effort to destroy any evidence that was on the carpet. Investigators confronted Jason with what they found at his home. Faced with the incriminating evidence, Jason agreed to tell them what happened, but only if they agreed to leave Christina Markham out of it.
He's talking about how he loves her, and he wants to protect her, and he's even bargaining at this point in time for some kind of a deal. If I tell you what took place, will you promise me that you won't arrest her?
Detectives weren't in the position to be making any promises, but they told Jason they couldn't help him or Christina if he didn't tell the truth. That's when they expected Jason to confess to Angela's murder, but instead, they were in for another surprise. Jason told detectives that in the days leading up to his wife's disappearance, their arguments had been getting worse and worse. Even though he told her he was getting back together with Christina, Angela decided she wasn't moving out.
Christina and Jason wanted Angela to leave, but she refused.
To make matters worse, police had given Angela permission to stay at the house, since it was considered their combined marital property. That's when Jason realized he and Angela weren't technically married, because he never filed their marriage license with the state after they'd signed it. Jason told police that when Christina heard that, she decided they would go back to the house and find the license to help her get a court order to get rid of Angela once and for all. But when they got back to the house, Jason said they found Angela passed out on the couch. It looked like she had taken a few Valium and fallen asleep.
Jason and Christina didn't think she was going to be there, so there was somewhat of a little bit of a surprise element when they found her in the house asleep.
Jason told police that he kept an eye on Angela while Christina went through the house looking for the license.
He had her upstairs going through everything, just ransacking the whole house while he kept watch. She had found it, but by this time it was already too late. Angela had woken up.
Jason said that when Angela saw Christina in the house, she became enraged. The two women started yelling at one another, but Jason couldn't take it anymore.
There was an argument between Christina and Angela, and not wanting to have any part of that, he just kind of went outside to smoke.
But Jason said when he came back inside, he was shocked to find Christina on top of Angela, strangling her to death. He claimed that he tried to stop her, but it was already too late.
He saw Christina over Angela's body, realized that it didn't appear that she was alive or moving, tried to resuscitate her with CPR, and unfortunately that was unsuccessful.
Jason said that Christina begged him not to say anything and talked him into helping her cover up what she'd done.
He loved Christina, regardless of what he'd seen, regardless of what had happened, that he felt the need to protect her.
Jason said that Christina made him cut up Angela's body and dump the bags in the field. Then they set fire to Angela's Nissan Altima and burned the pieces of carpet in their fireplace to destroy any DNA evidence. Jason said that he'd gone along with the plan out of love for Christina, but afterward he was horrified, and the mental strain caused by helping Christina cover up the crime had caused him to snap. It was a shocking and grim confession, but when police questioned Christina Markham, she had a very different story to tell. Christina admitted that she had witnessed Angela die, but it was Jason and not her who killed Angela.
She said, I tried to stop him, Mariah. I said, stop him from doing what? She said he was choking her. She said, I jumped on his back. I was beating on his back. I tried like hell to stop him.
Christina told police that while she was innocent, she'd agreed to help Jason cover up the murder because she was afraid for her own life, and she knew from personal experience how violent Jason could be.
She was afraid that he would kill her next if she didn't stay silent, didn't help him.
Detectives didn't know which of the stories to believe, but they knew one thing for certain. No matter who killed Angela Singleton, both Jason and Christina had conspired to cover it up. Authorities arrested the couple and charged them with first-degree felony murder. Coming up, as their day in court approaches, the lovers turn on one another.
The tone of her voice, her demeanor, everything just snapped.
And as the jury tries to determine who is telling the truth, they hear shocking testimony that Jason had an entirely different reason for killing his wife.
The defense tried to put forth the theory that that was why Jason killed her. It wasn't a crime of passion or jealousy that involved Christina.
In January of 2011, Christina Markham and Jason Singleton's on and off again relationship appeared to have taken a deadly turn. Police believe the couple had conspired to kill Jason's current wife, Angela Singleton, and then dismember her body. But while the couple had both been charged with Angela's murder, the question of who actually committed the crime was still in dispute. So far, lab tests had only been able to connect Jason Singleton to the crime scene.
The only real evidence found at the house was DNA of Jason Singleton.
If the prosecutors were going to convict Christina Markham, they knew they needed Jason's help. So he was offered a deal where he pled to lesser charges.
Jason did not plead guilty to murder. He pleaded guilty to complicity to commit murder. He breached his duty to protect somebody that was unable to defend themselves from somebody that he knew to be a very serious risk to her. And then he participated in the abuse of the body and the cover-up.
For his plea, Jason received a sentence of 30 years in prison. In exchange, he wrote a signed confession outlining Christina's role in Angela's murder.
He submitted a 2-page written allocution stating that Angela and Christina were in the house and they were fighting, and he stepped outside to smoke a cigarette, and when he came back in, Christina had killed Angela.
But would Jason's word be enough to convict Christina of murder? In March of 2014, Christina stood trial for the death of Angela Singleton. Prosecutors described Christina as a bitter and obsessed ex-lover who resented Angela, and that after she killed her rival, she manipulated Jason into helping her cover it up.
It's almost like she has some kind of hypnotic control over him, some kind of spell, working her magic over him to do whatever she wanted him to do.
Next, prosecutors called Christina's friend, Mariah Smith, to the stand, who testified that Christina was more than capable of committing murder. She told the jury that Christina had stalked her for days after Angela's body had been found, demanding to know if she had spoken to police, and even threatening her life if she cooperated with the investigation.
The tone of her voice, her demeanor, everything just snapped. She said, you've always been scared of me because you know what I'm capable of. And I thought, well, if I didn't, I damn sure do now.
It wasn't looking good for the defense, but when it came time to present their case, Christina's attorneys argued that the lack of physical evidence tying Christina to the crime scene was proof she was innocent.
The fact that Christina Markham's DNA is nowhere to be found, nowhere on Angela Singleton's body, nowhere on the garbage bags, clearly indicate that she didn't have anything to do with it.
They also revealed that Jason wasn't quite the successful businessman he appeared to be. Although he bought Christina an expensive engagement ring and a house, The fact of the matter was, he owed $30,000 to creditors, and his house was in foreclosure.
I didn't know about his debt. I didn't know about his money problems. I just saw him as a businessman. You know, they had a nice house, nice car.
According to the defense, Jason had funded his lavish lifestyle by using the computers at his work to create fake driver's licenses for drug dealers funneling pills into Kentucky. Angela knew about it, and after Jason kicked her out of the house, the defense revealed that she spilled the beans to police to get back at him.
About 12 hours before Angela Singleton is killed, she tells the police they're running this ID scam to bring pills up from Florida.
The defense tried to put forth the theory that that was why Jason killed her. It wasn't a crime of passion or jealousy that involved Christina.
It was surprising evidence, but was it enough to exonerate Christina? On May 23, 2014, the jury announced their verdict. They found Christina Markham guilty of complicity in Angela's murder and cover-up, the same charge Jason pled guilty to. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison.
It is notable that neither one of them was convicted of murder. It was complicity to murder.
They don't know who did it, just you guys are both involved, so we're going to convict you.
The truth about what happened may never be known. But no matter which of the lovers committed the murder, one thing is certain. Their twisted passion for one another had spiraled out of control and drove them each to carry out an act of unforgivable evil. Samantha Baczynski was a lonely 19-year-old, desperate for affection.
She'd never really been pursued by a man.
That is, until she caught the eye of 27-year-old Patrick Selapak, a hunky ex-con with a nice body and a bad boy reputation.
So here comes along this kind of dangerous guy. He had been in prison before, and he was sort of living on the edge.
Their sizzling romance brought a whirlwind of excitement to Samantha's otherwise dull life. But it all took a chilling turn when police uncovered a grisly double murder.
They found their bodies basically mummified.
The search for the truth would expose a sordid web of treachery and betrayal, and leave everyone wondering if Samantha's bad boy boyfriend was more bad news than she realized. Or had his criminal tendencies unlocked Samantha's own killer potential.
They were a perfect, sick puzzle piece that went together.
Baltimore, Michigan, February 16th, 2006. It was just before 5:30 p.m. when a pair of local police officers received a call from dispatch. A young couple who lived in the area hadn't been heard from by their family, and now police were stopping by their house to do a welfare check. When police arrived at the home and approached the front door, they immediately found evidence that something was indeed amiss.
The lock had been broken off the door.
The officers cautiously made their way inside. At first glance, the home appeared to be empty, with no trace of the missing couple. That is, until the officers stepped into a back room that appeared to be under renovation.
One of the officers had kicked some debris and saw feet. They then found the two bodies wrapped in plastic and taped with duct tape.
They were bodies, basically mummified.
But who did the bodies belong to? The missing homeowners? Or someone else? And who was responsible for this gruesome crime? Little did investigators then know that the answers to those questions would only plunge the case further into mystery, before ultimately unveiling a twisted tale of obsession, greed, and a pair of killers willing to do anything to stay together.
This story is twisted, it's bizarre, it is unlike anything that anyone was expecting to see that day.
Imlay City, Michigan, a small town about 30 miles east of Flint. Imlay City was also where young Samantha Baczynski grew up. Born in 1986, Samantha's home life was troubled from the start.
She came from a broken home. Her father had been arrested for a sex offense. So she grew up in a home with just her mother and younger brother.
Samantha's mother worked long hours to raise her and her brother all by herself. And with Samantha's father in prison for most of her youth, she grew up suffering from a lack of affection.
She was a young girl that didn't get the attention that most young girls get.
I didn't get the feeling that she was brought up with a lot of love in the family.
By the time Samantha was in high school, the lack of love and attention resulted in a very low sense of self-esteem for the teenager.
She was a girl that just kept to herself, did not have many friends.
She really fit the profile of a sad, depressed, lonely, and isolated teenager.
But even though she shied away from others, deep down, Samantha secretly yearned for affection.
All she really wanted was to be loved. She wanted a boyfriend like most teenage girls do.
Though as a social outcast, Samantha decided to channel her focus on her studies and make school her priority. She graduated near the top of her class, and with her diploma in hand, set her sights on a career in nursing.
She seemed to have some bigger goals for her life. She was really trying to make something of her life.
But despite her academic achievements, the now 19-year-old was still lonely. So in the fall of 2005, Samantha decided she was going to finally find a boyfriend. Since she wasn't great at meeting new people in person, she decided to take her search online.
She joined some online dating sites, which was really kind of a new adventure for her, very liberating. She was hoping for a clean slate, hoping to escape some of the social stigmas that she had experienced in high school.
In fact, Samantha was surprised by how easy it was to meet all sorts of men online. But it was one man in particular who responded to her online profile that really captured her attention. A handsome and friendly 27-year-old named Patrick Selepak.
The handsome guy, very handsome. He's tall, he's good looking. I mean, he would be attractive to most young women.
Born in 1978 and raised in Detroit, Michigan, Patrick's childhood, like Samantha's, was rocky at best.
He grew up without a father. He was in a broken home.
He was in constant conflict, it appeared, as a young man with his mother.
A particular point of contention between Patrick and his mother seemed to be the ever-changing stream of boyfriends she brought home, several of which were known to take their frustrations out on young Patrick.
He was abused by the boyfriends, physically abused.
The abuse finally ended when Patrick turned 17, and his mother kicked him out of the house. But the damage had already been done.
Over the period of time, this abuse caused him to hate the world.
He ended up falling into drugs and alcohol, which led him down the wrong road.
A road that soon led the teenager to steal and commit robbery to fund his addictions. But But Patrick's life of crime quickly came to an abrupt end.
At age 18, Patrick was arrested for armed robbery.
Patrick was sentenced to 8 years in prison, an environment that only fueled the young man's already deep-seated anger.
Here's a guy that already hates the world, and he's in there with a lot of people that have a similar background, people that are abused, people that have abused, and they feed off each other.
By the time Patrick was released from prison in June of 2005, he had transformed from a rebellious teenager into a hardened and world-weary 27-year-old man.
He was a changed man. He was cold and uncaring.
He viewed society as harming him, as creating him, as not giving him an opportunity.
But upon his release, Patrick soon realized there was one segment of society that was willing to give him plenty of opportunities, despite his checkered past.
Thanks to his rugged good looks, women flocked to Patrick, despite the fact that he had a criminal record. He could walk into a bar and within minutes, he'd be getting numbers from women.
Patrick's luck with the ladies certainly helped soften his hardened edge. And over the next few months, Patrick dated several women, but none of the relationships worked out. Soon, Patrick was taking his search for his next girlfriend online. And when he met Samantha Baczynski through an online dating profile in June of 2005, he was drawn to the shy 19-year-old who didn't seem to have much experience with men. As for Samantha, she was immediately blindsided by Patrick's good looks and natural charm.
Patrick was very likable. He made her laugh. He gave her the attention that she always wanted.
For a young woman like Samantha, who's 19, lonely, never really been pursued by a man, is then pursued and charmed by a very attractive older man who exhibits charm and strength. And so here she is with what she believes is her knight in shining armor.
And where most women would have been turned off by Patrick's prison record, Samantha was actually turned on. In her eyes, it made Patrick exciting, dangerous, and even more desirable. Like the idealized bad boy she never dreamed she could have in high school.
She had led such a sad, doldrum life up to that point that it was exciting to her.
An excitement that turned into raw ecstasy when the couple became intimate. For Samantha, who had never experienced any sort of physical romance before, the couple's connection was nothing short of electrifying. Where Patrick fed off Samantha's adoration. After spending most of his young adulthood behind bars, he was hungry for the passion and obsession Samantha was showing him. As he showed when he surprised Samantha by proposing just 5 months into their relationship.
There's excitement there, there's romance. To somebody like Samantha, I imagine it sounded irresistible.
Samantha's family was caught off guard by the engagement, especially to a fiancé with a questionable past. But they were also pleased to finally see Samantha so happy.
It was like the fairy tale she had always wanted.
Which made the bloody events that would soon follow all the more horrific. Because beneath this couple's lust and desire lay a hidden darkness. And when the awful truth was finally exposed, it would lay bare a series of crimes so gruesome and terrifying, it was almost impossible to believe. Coming up, police learn more about the horrifying last hours of the 2 victims found at the missing family's home.
This wasn't just a killing, it was just sadistic.
And a surprise piece of evidence gives police an unexpected glimpse at a killer.
Police find the victims bound with duct tape, and in the home is a receipt for some duct tape.
They went to the drugstore and reviewed the surveillance video, and they saw who had bought it.
When lonely 19-year-old Samantha Baczynski met handsome 27-year-old bad boy Patrick Selepak online, she was thrilled beyond words. In spite of his former prison record, the couple's relationship was brimming with lust and desire. And when Patrick surprised Samantha with a marriage proposal less than 6 months into their relationship, she could barely believe it.
He represented to her this life that she never dreamed she could have. So there's excitement there, there's romance. To somebody like Samantha, I imagine it sounded irresistible.
But as Samantha basked in the glow of her new engagement to a dream fiancé she thought she'd never have, police in the nearby town of New Baltimore, Michigan, were in the middle of investigating a grisly crime scene. It began on the afternoon of February 16th, when officers had been dispatched to the home of Melissa and Scott Barrels. Melissa's father had called and asked police to do a welfare check after he hadn't been able to get a hold of the couple. And after hearing a strange message on the couple's home answering machine left by his son-in-law.
They had called the house and heard the message that they were gone to the hospital.
What made the message even more strange was when Melissa's father checked the local hospitals, none of them had any record of the couple being admitted. That's when Melissa's father decided to call police. Officers responded, and upon arriving at the couple's home, made a troubling discovery.
When police got inside the home, they found the lock had been broken off the door.
It raised the specter that police might have come across a home invasion.
When police searched the home, they found no trace of intruders. But in the bedroom under renovation, they did find something even more terrifying.
When police were at the house, they found 2 bodies.
They were bodies, basically mummified, with tape all the way around, head and down.
Officers unwrapped each body and found that they were in fact the homeowners, Melissa and Scott Barrels.
He was beaten, and he was pretty bloodied.
Her face and lips are blue.
Officers turned the bodies over to the medical examiner's office, then searched the rest of the home for evidence. As they moved from room to room, they could detect a strong odor of bleach, which suggested whoever killed the Barrels had tried to cover their tracks.
Bleach is often used by perpetrators to clean up blood and destroy DNA evidence.
But officers soon discovered something the killer had missed while cleaning up the crime scene.
One of the pieces of evidence was a receipt to a drugstore.
The time of purchase had been 3 a.m. the previous morning, which also happened to be the last time anyone had heard from Scott or Melissa. But it was the single item listed on the receipt that really caught investigators' attention.
Police find the victims bound with duct tape, and in the home is a receipt for some duct tape.
Aware the receipt might be their best chance to catch the killer, investigators headed straight to the drugstore where the duct tape had been purchased. Luckily, the store was armed with security cameras. As they waited on a judge to sign warrants to obtain the security footage, detectives got word that the medical examiner had completed Scott and Melissa Barrels' autopsies. According to the ME's report, Scott had suffered severe blunt force trauma to the head.
Significant damage to his head, to his skull.
The autopsy also revealed that Scott's body showed signs of manual strangulation.
This guy's head is caved in. His neck shows signs of strangulation. His lungs show signs of suffocation. Whoever killed him really wanted him dead.
But the ME's report also showed that in addition to both beating and strangling Scott, the killer had gone one step further to ensure his death.
They injected him with bleach. He had a gruesome death. It was pure torture.
The ME's report had even more surprises when it came to Melissa's autopsy. Like Scott, she also died from a combination of manual strangulation and suffocation. But while blood tests didn't turn up any signs of bleach in Melissa's system, it revealed something else about the 27-year-old that was much more shocking and tragic.
Melissa Barrels was pregnant.
This means that the killer is not only responsible for the death of Scott and Melissa Barrels, but also for the death of their 10-week-old unborn child as well.
It was a horrific revelation and couldn't help but make detectives wonder, was it possible that the killer knew Melissa was pregnant? Or worse, could the pregnancy have been part of the motive behind the murder? Just as police began to consider this disturbing possibility, they received word that the drugstore where the duct tape had been purchased had turned over their surveillance tapes.
They went to the drugstore and reviewed the surveillance video, and they saw who had bought it.
You see some video of this woman coming and going from the store, making what looks like a routine purchase.
Unable to identify the woman themselves, investigators worked quickly to recruit the local news media for help.
The police released the video to get the word out that they were looking for this woman.
But little did investigators know that when revealed, the identity of the woman wouldn't only be shocking, it would turn the entire investigation on its head. Coming up, the effort to identify the woman from the drugstore uncovers a second sickening crime.
He tortured her. He put sand in her mouth.
And police receive a shocking phone call.
She said she's with the killers, and the police need to come right away.
By February of 2006, 19-year-old nursing student Samantha Baczynski and 27-year-old ex-con Patrick Selepak had put their troubled past behind them and began planning their futures together.
He immediately asked her to marry him. Had a ring. Here she is with what she believes is her knight in shining armor.
But while Samantha and Patrick made plans for their upcoming wedding, police in Samantha's hometown of Imlay City, Michigan, were investigating a shocking double murder. Melissa and Scott Barrels had been found brutally murdered inside their home.
They were both wrapped in plastic and tape like a pair of mummies.
Autopsies revealed that Scott had been beaten, strangled, suffocated, and injected with bleach, while Melissa, who had been strangled and suffocated, was 10 weeks pregnant at the time of her death.
This wasn't just a killing, it was just sadistic.
It was just so brutal. And you just think that the devil has taken over these people.
But on the same day they discovered the bodies, investigators also got their first break in the case when they traced a receipt found at the crime scene back to a local drugstore. Surveillance tapes from the store revealed a young woman buying the duct tape the couple's bodies had been wrapped in on the night of the murder.
It was very easy for them to see who bought the tape, and what the police did immediately was put that up out in the media.
Once the footage of the young woman hit the local TV stations, it wasn't long before police got word that someone recognized her. According to callers, the woman was 19-year-old local resident Samantha Baczynski. Investigators immediately dug into Samantha's background, but were unable to come up with any sort of criminal record.
She's a person who doesn't have a criminal history of any kind, certainly nothing like this. So how is she involved, and who involved her?
When investigators tried to track Samantha down, she was nowhere to be found. But they quickly heard from family members like her mother that wherever Samantha was, she was most likely with her new fiancé, 27-year-old Patrick Selepak. And police quickly found that unlike Samantha, Patrick had a substantial criminal record. In fact, police learned that in addition to the 8 years he'd served for armed robbery, Patrick had just completed another jail sentence just weeks earlier, and for a totally different violent crime.
Investigators learned that in November of 2005, Patrick had been arrested after a particularly troubling incident with the girlfriend he had before he started dating Samantha.
He assaulted his ex-girlfriend, even choking her.
It wasn't just slapping her, he beat her pretty badly and then tortured her. He put sand in her mouth.
The assault had occurred just 8 weeks into Patrick and Samantha's relationship. The ex-girlfriend pressed charges, and Patrick had landed in jail.
He was arrested again and sent to county jail for 64 days.
According to those who knew Samantha and Patrick, the new charges did little to dissuade Samantha from being with him. If anything, it seemed to make the lonely 19-year-old even more desperate to hold on to her violent boyfriend. And while Samantha was ready to wait years for Patrick to be released, as it turned out, she only had to wait weeks.
He goes to jail, and you have to have a parole hearing within 45 days. The state doesn't give him that parole hearing in a timely manner.
There had been a paperwork mistake, so he's released.
When he was released, he went to Samantha. He proposed to her, and she said yes.
With the new revelation of Patrick's violent past, police immediately launched an all-out manhunt to track down the ex-con and his loyal fiancée, Samantha Baczynski.
The manhunt began immediately once they identified who they were. It was in the news, on the radio.
There was a lot of people that were looking for these guys.
For the next several days, there was no sign of Patrick or Samantha. That is, until February 21st, when police got a phone call from a young woman 100 miles away in Owasso, Michigan. The woman said her name was Tara Beecham, an old acquaintance who'd met Samantha through mutual friends about a year before. She also told police that earlier that same day, Samantha and Patrick had made an unexpected visit to her home in Owasso.
Patrick and Samantha went over to Tara's house, and they're hanging out.
When Samantha showed up at Tara's house, she surprised her by sporting a new pink hairstyle. But Samantha's new hair color wasn't the only thing that caught Tara off guard. Tara told police that in the middle of their conversation, she'd gotten an unexpected phone call from another friend. A friend who called to tell her that Samantha Baczynski was wanted for murder.
A friend had called her on the phone and told her. She got scared and didn't know what to do.
Out of desperation, Tara said she came up with a plan.
She made up this story about having a job interview, and so she needed a ride there.
Tara asked Patrick and Samantha to give her a ride in the pickup truck they were driving to a local hotel where she said her job interview would be taking place.
They said, well, we'll drive you. So they drove her to the Comstock Inn.
Tara said the couple dropped her off at the hotel, where she immediately went inside and called the police.
She went to this hotel, and once inside, she phoned the police, and they were in the parking lot waiting for her.
Within minutes, the street outside the hotel was swarming with police. With their weapons drawn, officers converged on the blue pickup truck that Samantha and Patrick were driving.
The police showed up to this parking lot, and they surrounded the truck. They kind of swooped in.
But as police converged on the vehicle, they had no idea how the couple would react, or what they would eventually find inside. Coming up, police make another deadly discovery.
They lift up a tarp, and they find a body.
And the investigation takes another surprising twist when new evidence surfaces of a connection between Samantha, Patrick, and Scott and Melissa Barrels.
Patrick met Melissa in a chat room, and they sparked up a relationship.
Since first meeting online in August of 2005, 19-year-old nursing student Samantha Baczynski and 27-year-old ex-con Patrick Selepak had spent little time apart. The couple had even gotten engaged. But no sooner had Samantha accepted Patrick's proposal than the couple had become the focus of a nationwide police manhunt.
Patrick Selepak and Samantha Baczynski are wanted for murder.
The couple were suspected in the brutal double murder and torture of Scott and Melissa Barrels. A tragic crime made even more devastating by the revelation that Melissa had been 10 weeks pregnant at the time of her death.
It doesn't get any more violent. Very, very violent acts.
But within days of Samantha and Patrick being named as suspects, an informant had revealed the wanted couple was inside a pickup truck parked outside a hotel in Owasso, Michigan. Police immediately converged on the hotel. With weapons drawn, officers cautiously approached the vehicle, unsure of what the couple might do. But when the police got close enough, they were surprised to find the couple asleep inside the truck's cab.
Police were able to catch them by surprise.
Police roused Samantha and Patrick from their nap and placed them both under arrest.
The manhunt was finally over.
Officers then searched the couple's truck and soon made another deadly discovery.
They lift up a tarp and they find a body.
It was wrapped up from head to toe in plastic and tape, just like the barrels had been.
Police soon identified the victim as 52-year-old Fred Johnson, the owner of the pickup truck Samantha and Patrick had been driving.
Fred was a local man who had been reported missing several days earlier by some concerned friends.
It was the third victim tied to Samantha and Patrick. But what motive did the couple have to kill either Fred Johnson or the barrels? Back at the Owasso police station, investigators turned their attention to Samantha with the hopes of finding out. But if officers were expecting Samantha to confess to the couple's crimes, they were mistaken.
Samantha Paczynski requested an attorney, so she wasn't allowed to be interviewed.
But while Samantha hadn't been willing to talk, Patrick surprisingly was. But before he shared anything with detectives, he wanted to make one thing clear up front.
He said that Samantha did not play a role in any of the things that went on, that it was all him who committed these murders.
According to Patrick, the events that led up to the couple's crime spree began not long after he was released from his latest prison sentence for assaulting his ex-girlfriend. Once he got out, he'd asked Samantha to marry him. But to finance their new life together, Patrick needed to get his hands on some cash.
He decided the best way to make a living would be to steal merchandise from a local store and then resell it.
Patrick said he picked out a local grocery store to steal produce from. But in order to make his plan work, he'd need to find someone on the inside to help get access to the grocery stockroom. So he soon made friends with an employee who was able to supply him the access and information he needed. The employee's name? Melissa Barrels.
Patrick met Melissa online in a chat room and they sparked up a relationship. He soon started visiting her at the grocery store where she worked.
They develop a relationship. He uses her. She's telling him when the trucks come in, when the supplies are left, and he's stealing it.
Patrick claimed the plan worked out perfectly, and over the next few weeks, he was able to steal thousands of dollars in food and produce with the information Melissa provided him. All the while, Patrick claimed that he and Melissa soon became close friends. And he'd often go over to the house Melissa shared with her husband Scott to hang out. And that's exactly what he, Melissa, and Scott were doing on the afternoon of February 15th, when he went over to the couple's home. But in the middle of his visit, Melissa made an unexpected and shocking admission. An admission that Patrick claimed suddenly angered her husband Scott.
Patrick sitting in and talking to Melissa, and what set him off was when Melissa said, "I'm pregnant."
There was some speculation that Patrick and Melissa were having an affair, and that Melissa's baby belonged to Patrick, and that might have sparked the argument.
Patrick admitted to police that he and Melissa had slept together, but he couldn't say if Scott suspected he and Melissa were having an affair. All he knew for sure was that Scott was inexplicably furious, and that fury soon turned to violence.
He claimed that Scott picked up a knife and went at him.
Patrick told the police he tried to protect himself.
Silipag takes out a gun. He hits him repeatedly. He beats him brutally to the point that the guy is bleeding profusely and he thinks he's dead.
Realizing that he may have just killed Scott, Patrick told police he felt he had no other choice but to also kill Melissa.
What he does is he just grabs her by the neck and he chokes her until her face and lips are blue. Just chokes her to death.
But once Melissa was dead, Patrick told police he realized that Scott was still alive.
He turns his anger back on Scott and he puts a plastic bag over his head until there's no more movement.
To be sure that Scott was finally dead, Patrick claimed he resorted to one more final and unusual tactic.
He goes to the pharmacy and he gets bleach and syringes and shoots him up thinking that will kill him.
According to Patrick, it was only once he was certain that Scott and Melissa were both dead that he called Samantha to help him cover up the crime.
They wrap the bodies up in plastic and they get out of there.
Following the murders, Patrick said the couple tried to lay low for a few days. They headed to nearby Flint, where they checked into a local hotel and began hanging out at a nearby bar. It was there that the couple met 52-year-old Fred Johnson. According to Patrick, Fred seemed lonely and appreciated the company of the young couple.
They asked, "Hey, can we stay with you?" And being a nice guy, he said, "Sure."
For the next few days, Patrick told police he and Samantha stayed with Fred at his home. All seemed to be going well, until the evening of February 21st, when Fred came home from his job and confronted the couple.
Fred Johnson eventually discovers that they're wanted for a murder. He was going to turn them in.
Patrick told police that he immediately pulled a gun on Fred. Fearing for his life, Fred made a break for the front door.
As he tries to flee, Patrick Salapak claims that he shot him twice.
As Fred lay bleeding on the ground, Patrick walks over to him and then strangles him to death.
Investigators were stunned by Patrick's confession, but they couldn't help but wonder if Samantha would back up his statement. When Samantha learned Patrick had confessed, she changed her mind and agreed to talk as well. But Samantha didn't know Patrick had gone out of his way to not implicate her in his statement. And when she sat down to speak with investigators, she claimed the murder of Scott and Melissa Barrels hadn't been instigated by an act of self-defense, but instead part of a sinister plan Patrick had designed days before.
The plan was to take the Barrels' identity and sell the house.
He wanted to completely take over Scott's identity. He wanted to take over the identity, completely clean up the house, sell the house and get the money.
Samantha also told police that despite what Patrick claimed, she had been at Scott and Melissa's house when they were murdered. And after Patrick pulled a gun on the couple, he forced Scott to record a fake answering machine message claiming that he and his wife had gone to the hospital for an unspecified emergency in case anyone called the house. Then, Patrick began to beat and strangle the couple, and Samantha claimed she'd helped him do it.
He put the bag over his head, and then put the bag around his neck. And then he handed me the end of the belt and told me to put my foot on his head. At the same time, Patrick is over top of him, kneeling on his chest and his stomach with his hands around his throat, choking him.
After Melissa was dead, Samantha helped Patrick to kill Scott. She was the one that came up with the idea to inject Scott with bleach to make sure that he was dead.
It was a gruesome confession, but Samantha told police that Patrick had left her no choice.
She claimed that he was forcing her to do everything, that he would come back and kill me if I didn't cooperate.
Prosecutors, however, determined that it would be up to a jury to decide. On February 23rd, both Samantha and Patrick were charged with first-degree murder in the deaths of Melissa and Scott Barrels. But in June of 2006, Patrick proved that he wasn't done with surprises. In a shocking move, he pled guilty to all charges against him.
Michigan law makes that a mandatory life offense.
no chance of parole.
While the move was unusual, investigators and prosecutors had a theory as to why he did it. Patrick knew his confession to the murders had all but guaranteed his conviction. And if he was going back to prison, at least he could benefit from the notoriety his violent crimes would bring him.
He wanted to have some notoriety. He was a person that spent a lot of time incarcerated, and this was going to enhance his stature in a correctional facility.
With Patrick behind bars for the rest of his life, prosecutors could now focus all their efforts on making sure that Samantha would join him. But would a jury see Samantha as Patrick's willing accomplice? Or an innocent victim who'd been forced to participate in the crimes against her will? Coming up, in a desperate attempt to avoid prison, Samantha retracts her confession.
I never wanted those people to die. I never killed those people.
But before her fate is rendered, Samantha receives one last surprise from Patrick Selepak.
You should have seen the look on her face. She thought this guy was still in love with her. She looked devastated.
By the fall of 2006, 28-year-old Patrick Selepak had already pled guilty to murdering 52-year-old Fred Johnson, as well as expectant parents Melissa and Scott Barrels. But he had taken pains to emphasize one detail when it came to the involvement of his 20-year-old fiancée, Samantha Baczynski.
He said that Samantha did not play a role in any of the things that went on.
But when Samantha gave her version of events to investigators, she told a very different story.
Samantha Baczynski said that she put a bag over Melissa Barrel's head and wrapped a belt around her neck.
She helped suffocate those two people. She injected bleach in Scott.
But even though Samantha admitted to her role in the murders, she also claimed that it was Patrick who made her do it. In October, Samantha arrived in Macomb County Circuit Court, where she faced multiple charges, including first-degree murder in the deaths of Melissa and Scott Barrels. As prosecutors presented opening arguments, they tackled Samantha's claims of being in fear for her own life head-on.
Samantha had numerous times that she could have ran from Patrick to tell police what was going on, but she chose not to do that.
In fact, the prosecution argued that Samantha's participation in the murders wasn't motivated by fear, but by lust. They claimed Samantha was so obsessed with Patrick, she was willing to do anything to please him, even kill at his command.
She'd go to the end of the world for this guy.
But Samantha's defense attorneys had a very different take on the events that took place inside the Barrels' home. They claimed Samantha wasn't a killer, but another victim of Patrick Selepak's murderous rage.
She was forced to participate in these murders with Patrick. At one point, he held a gun to her and told her she had to do this.
On October 19th, 2006, the defense called a surprise witness who they hoped would affirm for the jury that Samantha was indeed forced to participate in the murders. 28-year-old Patrick Selepak.
Samantha expected up to that very moment that her hero was going to come in and save her.
But it became clear soon after Patrick entered the courtroom that unlike when he spoke to police, he had no interest in saving Samantha.
He got on the witness stand and he had a smirk on his face and he said, "I'm not talking about nothing."
It seemed that for whatever reason, Patrick had decided against helping Samantha and her defense team. A shocking decision, given his effort to clear Samantha's name during his own court proceedings.
He spoke to the judge very briefly, said he didn't have anything to say, wasn't going to testify.
You should have seen the look on her face. She thought this guy was still in love with her. She looked devastated.
Without Patrick's testimony, it was up to the jury to decide whether or not Samantha was guilty. After 2 days of deliberation, they announced they had reached a verdict. Samantha was found guilty on all charges. During her sentencing, Samantha begged the judge for leniency.
I never wanted those people to die. I never killed those people to begin with. Patrick is the one that killed them, not me.
In spite of her pleas, Samantha was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But even though the love between Patrick and Samantha didn't hold up in court, it was clear that while they were together, the chemistry was intense and the results were deadly.
Samantha and Patrick both received things that each other were looking for. She received the attention and the love from Patrick, and Patrick had his ego fed from Samantha.
They were a perfect, sick puzzle piece that went together.
Gazing at the stars in the velvet sky, lost in memories of a time gone by. Melodies of the past played in my mind, whispers of the wind slowing down time. Let the music surround us, take us away to a sweeter place where memories stay. In this world of dreams, we will find a little piece of soul in the music that binds, painting pictures in the colors of sound. Echoes of the heart softly resound, lost in the rhythm